This is absolutely frustrating. Making these Batman 89 capes, well, I got failures all over the place. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Especially for 1989, the Keaton era of Batman capes. There's several ways to do it, and neither one of them are wrong. They're just absolutely frustrating. Here's my first attempt. Sorry about the video, it's a little dark. I try to lighten it. But the best way to do the first one, well, I thought it was the best way, is to make these different panels. However, my mistake was that I made one too many. Instead of having 8 scallops, it ended up having 9. Now, the nice thing about this is you can pretty much control each and every single one, but the problem is that there are so many panels. And if you don't cut them the correct width at the bottom, it's not going to line up. But yes, you do have to make them long. But once you sew them together, and if you're off by any amount, it throws the entire cape off. And it just doesn't look right. It looks great on the outside, but once you put it on the shoulders over the figure, it doesn't cover properly. Let me show you what this looks like. Finalizer installed on the body. This is my first attempt, and while it looks okay over the shoulders and the back, it doesn't close properly. It's too stretched out, and if you look on the back side, it doesn't have that center point because it's got one too many scallops. So that center scallop in the back doesn't have a center bat point in the center, so it just looks off, and it was irritating to look at it this way. But let's move on to the next failed attempt. Are you ready? Here we go. Here is my next failed attempt. Instead of cutting panels, I decided to cut, well, not to cut it, but cut one piece of material and sew the scallops or the splines into the cape as one piece. So if you're off on the ironing, on the measuring on these, it's going to throw it off and you're not going to be happy. Now, the nice thing about this material, it is forgiving. However, it does not stretch. So you have to be precise in your sewing. Now, the problem was that, okay, once you got it sewn and you got it all ready to go, how do you install it? How do you get this Keaton cape to look good without having to use tons of glue to be able to put it into place? Well, I had to refer back to the Mezco capes. And Mezco has this little tiny disc that goes in the back, and I'll show you in just a minute. But before that, look at this. This cape, the original cape, was around this peg. And this peg goes all the way up into the cowl. Now, don't separate the cowl from the emblem, because gluing that back down is going to be a real chore. And you're not going to separate it like this by just using heat. You're going to have to cut it. And you will be left with a stump in the center of the shoulders. Now, to put this back together, yes, you could use glue. The best way to do it is to take out that peg for the neck and insert a small, thin, but long screw. And then you can torque it down. And this is my failed attempt. Not only is the cape way too long, it just doesn't drape properly. But you have to actually cut it this way so that you can cut it to size, especially around the back. Well, not the back, the sides, I should say, because the back was actually easy to cut. But once you cut it like this, if you don't match up your scallops, it's going to be lopsided. And that's where it was so difficult to keep this symmetrical. Even when folding it in half and having the sewn edges on the exterior. It was difficult to make those edges meet. That's what's so frustrating. But once you've got it down and you cut it correctly, it looks pretty good. But this is my second failed attempt. Now, if you think you can just throw the cape over the shoulder, it's not going to work. It's not going to help. It just looks worse, especially when the material is this big. By the way, there's no wire in this yet. It's just the sewn material. And yes, here's the other dilemma. Sewing black thread on black material, it's really tough. Here's my third attempt. I took that same cape, tried to rescue it, and I used an inner liner. It looks good from here, but if you look at the edge where the scallops are cut out, I decided to sew it. I did glue it down. It looked, actually I should have left it the way it was, but I decided to be more creative and I tried sewing the edge and I can't sew straight. It looks really bad and I just don't like the fact that it looks too obvious. Yes, I could have sewn it on the inside, but then you gotta fold it back out and you've got a pillow look. Now this is the ring that I'm talking about. I had to make it myself. I call it a D ring because it looks like a D or an upside down U, whatever you want to call it. And I cut it out in white so that I can show it to you against the black. On my final one, I cut it in black. This is a piece of styrene that I cut down, and Mezco uses the same principle. You attach the cape to the ring, which then you attach onto the shoulders. And at this point, you can either leave it the way it is or glue it down. Now it's just not the ring by itself, but you're gonna have to mark out some holes that you're gonna drill out. And that's for you to hand sew it or stitch it to the cape. Now once you've got it stitched to the cape, it'll be much easier to mount it or dismount it. However, if you're gonna put that screw up in that center of the cowl or the neck, that's it. Your cape is gonna be fixed. If you're gonna glue it, same thing. But if you want to remove it, you'll have to remove that screw. If you glue it down, if you use super glue, it's going to be really difficult and you may damage your cape. By the way, that's the way that ring should look out like on the cape once it's sewn. Once it's sewn on, it looks like this. It helps you to get the look you need instead of having to fight and struggle with those wires. And yes, here I do have some wire going through the front, but look how much cleaner it looks. I don't have to fight the installation. And because the cape is anchored to that actual ring, I can position it in any dynamic pose and it'll hold. And by the way, this is not glued on. It's not even really attached to the body. It's just sitting around that peg. And that cowl is covering up the edges. Now, if you're gonna do this, you have to keep in mind that you're gonna have to sew your splines all the way up to the top. And if you are off on the edge and you didn't sew it all the way, it's gonna show that cowl will not cover it completely. You'll have to hand sew it. But once you get it done correctly, this is what your cape should look like. This is now actually my 5th attempt at cutting this material and sewing it like this. The other issue with this material is that because it is a stressed pleather, in other words, it has a plastic coating on one side, you can't sew it straight on that side where the plastic is or the vinyl is because it sticks to the surface. And because it does do that, it's really difficult to get the wire in there. It will snag automatically. If you sew the splines to the outside, then you've got the felt on the inside and it's really easy for the wire to go through. But it doesn't look as good as the splines on the inside where the felt is. So you're gonna have to decide what you want to do, how you want to present your cape in the end so that you can get a correct looking 1989 cape. It is difficult to do. It is tedious, but in the end, you'll be very happy when you invest that amount of time. So yes, for every good cape you see, there's 3 or 4 that I blew it off. By the way, I want to end it with this. I want to show you what I did with this. This is the faceplate that I took and I painted it, added a tiny magnet to change out the faceplates. And I got the idea from somebody else. It's not my idea. By the way, none of these ideas that I'm sharing are new. They've all been done.